truths of the night. Once again, we gather in search of the truth, dark, and mystery. It's the Drunk Turkey Show.
Big development today in the investigation into the murders of 4 University of Idaho students. According to state and local officials and court documents, 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger has been arrested. He was arrested and arraigned this morning in Pennsylvania.
We have new details on what Bryan Kohberger was doing right before his arrest. Police say as a tactical team burst in to arrest the Idaho murder suspect, he was in pajamas and latex gloves, stuffing trash into Ziploc bags.
Hey, greetings from the year 3000. It still sucks. This is Philip J. Fry, and you're listening to the Drunken Turkey Show. Your one stop for this sort of thing. Hit that button, like and subscribe. You know what to do, just like every other podcast.
You guys know what to do, just like every other podcast. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the DT Show. I'm Daniel, and I hope everybody's having a good week. It's hump day. It's the middle of the week. There's some more information that is coming out more and more every day in the Bryan Kohberger case. And today, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of these questions that we've had for a while. Some of the questions we've had for a minute were just recently answered in an interview with Bill Thompson and the Idaho Statesman. But before we start, I want to give a special shout out to say happy birthday to Aiden. He's a son of one of our great mods, Sirius. I want to say happy birthday. I hope you have a good one. I hope it's a memorable one, and don't make your mom worry too much. But you have a good one. Have fun and be safe. All righty, guys. So with that said, let's get into today's conversation. Let's get into today's topic. Oh, hold on. I needed to put something up. I almost forgot. People asked me to do this. If you wanted to donate, down there in the description or in the rolling at the bottom. All right. So this is from the Idaho Statesman. They had a interview. I think this was Kevin Fixler. He had an interview with Bill Thompson. I think this is a phone interview. And he answered some of the questions he had some answers to some of the questions we've had for some time now. So let's read through this. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but I am going to read through the highlights, the big parts, the things that we didn't know. So without further ado, let's break it down. Bill Thompson acknowledged that prosecuting Bryan Kohberger, who pled guilty to murdering 4 University of Idaho students, might not have been possible if the killer had not left his DNA at the crime scene. Without that critical piece of evidence, the state could have struggled to bring charges, let alone make an arrest of its only suspect. I mean, that's huge. You know, a lot of people wonder, would Bryan Kohberger have been arrested had he not forgotten the knife sheath that had his DNA on it? You know, I think that they would have eventually got a hold of him. I think it would have, there would have been some evidence there. You know, you would have had his phone information, his phone history there, the fact that he had turned his phone off and turned it on during that specific odd hour of the night, his vehicle without the front license plate, but it'd be hard. It'd be hard. And, I think that without this DNA, I think Bill Thompson's absolutely right. I think he's being 100% honest. Without it, they may have struggled to even just bring charges against him, which is, I know a lot of people say, they talk about the mistakes that he made. And I agree. He made a lot of them. He took his phone, he turned it off. He left the DNA, the knife sheath with his DNA there, and to the Kohbergers, I would ask him, I was like, with so many stupid mistakes that he made, are you surprised? Why are you so surprised he got caught? Right. But in reality, none of those stupid mistakes that he made really led to his arrest. And had it not been for this knife sheath that was left behind, I completely agree with Bill Thompson here. I think it would have been very difficult to have brought charges against him. There was no motive, apparently, and not one that they can point to. There was no murder weapon, no DNA in the vehicle, no DNA in the apartment complex or in the apartment. So it would have been tough. And if he didn't leave the knife sheath behind, his DNA would not have been on the scene. So what would you have had? Just his car outside and his phone off during that time? You may have had the you could have gotten well, I mean, he didn't even search for them. I mean, we'll get into it more. So he goes on to say there are a lot of white Hyundai Elantras out there, Thompson said, but if they stuck with it, eventually they would have found Kohberger's car. It made that preliminary connection. As an example of what is still a mystery, the order of the 4 victims' deaths is not entirely clear, Bill Thompson said. But he and investigators believe Goncalves or Mogen might have been Kohberger's intended target because it appears he entered through the home and immediately went to the 3rd floor where the attacks occurred. And as alleged by Goncalves' oldest sister at sentencing, Kohberger may have used a second weapon in the murders. Her injuries include a horizontal pattern, but that didn't break the skin and weren't fatal, Thompson said. There were injuries that appeared to have been caused by something other than the knife, although it could have been the knife, Thompson said. I don't think we can exclude the possibility that there was an additional weapon involved. Now, my overall take of the temperature of this conversation here, or what Bill Thompson is trying to say, is that they can't say that it wasn't the knife, that it could have been another item. For instance, the K-bar knife sharpener, it also had those horizontal markings, but it kind of sounds like they believe it was the knife. And if you looked at a K-bar knife, it has horizontal lines on the handle, and it didn't break the skin, apparently. All right. So, I mean, there was some force applied, enough to leave marks, but not enough to break the skin. So it sounds like Kohberger pressed the handle of the blade up against Kaylee's mouth and pushed it against her face. That's what it sounds like, to leave those impressions and it not break the skin. Because had he gone at her with such, now I do think that did happen, because Steve mentioned that her teeth were knocked out, so there must have been some sort of force there, but it didn't break the skin, apparently, and it's a little confusing. I'll be 100% honest with you, but I guess, because you would assume if something has enough force to break the teeth and knock them out, that would also have had enough force to break the skin on the mouth, the lips. Busting a lip, that's not very hard to do, to bust the lip. So it's weird how it didn't break the skin, yet she also had missing teeth. So I don't know, but this is the information that they're putting out there. Autopsy reports are confidential in Washington, he noted, but shared generally that the toxicology results for the 4 victims, varying levels of alcohol intoxication, and no evidence of any illegal drug use at all, Thompson said. Now, I know that in some of the documents they referred to some blue powder that they referred to as drugs, and they speak to a couple of different friends of the victims, and they talk about maybe perhaps Adderall being used. I'm assuming that's, they probably had a prescription for it, at least one or both of them, whoever were using it, and that's why it's considered any illegal drug use at all. That's my assumption. I don't know, but they found blue powder and a rolled up $2 bill, and I believe it was Bethany who mentioned also that night that Ethan had taken Adderall, and so did Xana. But here it is. Thompson said that there was no evidence of illegal drug use at all. Just 2 of the 4 victims, Kaylee Goncalves and Xana Kernodle, had defensive wounds, he said. Among the people police interviewed during the investigation was a woman who drove for a food delivery service, DoorDash, and brought an order of Jack in the Box to Kernodle at about 4 a.m. Thompson confirmed her identification and said prosecutors intended to call her as a witness had there been a trial, but only to establish a timeline of the murders. Based on the neighborhood video surveillance footage, the woman did not come across Kohberger or his car, he said. Instead, she likely saw a light-colored SUV. So a little bit more information that has come out about this, and this makes a little bit more sense. Now, I told you guys about what the DoorDasher had relayed, some information that went from one person and then to me. And it was pretty much what it was that she said, that she parked out there and that she saw, and who she thought was Bryan Kohberger, the killer, but she saw a vehicle out there and that the person was intensely staring at the house, or zoned out. And to the point where that person didn't notice her. Apparently that interaction did occur, but that occurred with another vehicle, not related to the crime. And so this was apparently during the time when Bryan Kohberger wasn't in the area, which makes a little bit more sense, because a lot of people were saying, well, if Bryan Kohberger knew that the DoorDash order had just got there, he's taking a huge risk going in there knowing somebody was still awake. And I agree to that. And then also the other fact was, I had mentioned multiple times that I didn't think that the DoorDasher and Bryan Kohberger actually crossed paths. And the reason behind that, let me rephrase that. I thought that there was a possibility that the DoorDasher saw him, but I didn't think that the Bryan Kohberger saw the DoorDasher. And the reason behind that is I said that the light was on, which the DoorDasher indicated that the light was on to the residents. I felt that was always an indicator to Bryan that somebody was there, and that after the DoorDash was received, that the light turned off. I believe that was the difference, and I've been saying this for a long time. That was the difference between when he passes at 350 and then again at 404, and then he's all of a sudden driving erratically. He goes in front of Linda Lane. He ends up, that Linda Lane footage, parks there for like 11 seconds, backs up and goes back towards the house. PCA says that they see, we can deduce that headlights are seen on some of the houses, and it indicates that Bryan Kohberger's car, when he's coming back, either tries to park or do another 3-point turn there in front of the victim's residence. He does it unsuccessfully, then goes to the King Queen Road intersection, does a 3-point turn, and then heads back. And then you can see him back on the Linda Lane footage. And in this return, you hear a horn hit. He accidentally hits the horn. And then, he's also going at a lot faster pace than he was the previous times that he had passed by. So he had already known prior to parking in the back that this was go time, that he was going to commit this crime. This wasn't another, trip around just to see. And if he's pulling up and if everything looks good, he's going to do it. He already knows he's going to go back there and park. And those are the reasons why, and so he's speeding up. So he knows that before he pulls up behind him. That told me that the light was turned off. And so I always thought there's no way Bryan Kohberger saw the DoorDasher. He saw the light and then he saw the light off. And that told me that he thought that whoever was in the house had probably just simply gone to sleep at that point. Now, the DoorDasher also indicates in the document that where she's referencing, when it's referencing her interview with law enforcement, that the light in Xana's room was on, which is exactly what I had told you guys as well. The information that was passed on, from the DoorDasher to her friend to me, and that she had said that the light was on and that she had seen Xana in the window. That's exactly what she says. She sees Xana in the window, and then Xana's kind of, dipping her head down when they make eye contact or whatever the case may be. And so those things were still accurate. The fact that she had a misidentification of who she thought she saw there, is it possibly being Bryan or his vehicle? Okay, there was another vehicle that left, but the other information is still valid. The light, Xana up in the second floor, those things. And I would reckon to believe that those things would have been prevalent prior to the DoorDasher arriving and Bryan Kohberger in that area driving around a few times. So this is the reason why he doesn't stop. So that's one of the things that we can deduce from this information here, especially when it comes to the DoorDasher. And it kind of, to me, I know that in here, they say that Bill Thompson says that, and it may not have been here, it may have been in another interview with Kevin Fixler, but he stated that they don't know when Bryan Kohberger decided that he was going to commit the crime, or that this was there. these were his victims, this was his house, that he may have chosen it at that moment when he passed by that time, and it was a moment of opportunity. I don't believe that to be the case. You know, him passing by multiple times that night in that manner, and then immediately going to the house once the light was off, is a big indication that this was his target. This was his target before. It wasn't just at that moment at 4:05 that he decided, all right, this is my house. No way. I don't believe that to be the case. The vehicle and the person that she saw, that she thought might be the killer, is not Mr. Kohberger, Thompson said. That was a different vehicle and a different person at a slightly different time, from what the investigators were able to see from the security video. The only person to see Kohberger that morning was Dylan Mortenson. She saw a man clad in black who walked toward the second floor sliding glass door carrying a container of some kind. Investigators still don't know what Kohberger had in his hands. And during some other interviews, Kevin Fixler had described that Bryan Kohberger was walking out with some sort of container, and that there was something kind of pointing up like an arrow. And that was probably the knife, which is kind of weird to have the knife pointing up, but you know, it may have been the handle. The handle probably still would have looked like an arrow. Well, anyways, something like that while he was walking out. Investigators still don't know what Kohberger had in his hands. She also reported the man in the home, later identified as Kohberger, saw her after killing her roommates, but left anyways. So let's go back to who the target is, and let's talk a little bit about that real fast, and then we'll come back to this. He don't know who the targets are, but he suspects that it could be either Kaylee or it could have been Kaylee, could have been Maddie. My opinion, at bare minimum, it was both. Now, the reason behind that is right here. He saw Dylan, but decided to leave anyways. Now, maybe he changed. Maybe he adjusted, you know, while he was in the room. Maybe he took off a pair of gloves. Maybe he did something that prevented him from re-engaging. And that's a huge possibility, right? But somebody was aware of his presence, and he decided to leave, right? So what do we know about this entire situation? This is the TikTok warrant for Maddie and for Kaylee and Xana. And right here it says, on January 19th, I received an email from TikTok stating the data requested pursuant to the warrant was available to download. So remember, the PCA was written before this. It was written before Bryan Kohberger was arrested. So whatever information that they had, that it was at 4:12 that Xana was on TikTok, was just preliminary information, probably something that they were able to garnish from the phone. They probably wanted a little bit more of an accurate, because I think they said at approximately 4:12. So they probably wanted a little bit more accurate, so they go and get a warrant from TikTok to actually figure out exactly what time it was when she was on. And there's also some phone drift and things of that, time drift, things of that nature. So this is another warrant. This is from let me go forward. The state's reply to the defendant's motion, objection to the motion in limine. And this talks about when that warrant in January was received. And it says TikTok user records for Xana Kernodle was on May 5th, 2023. These records are maintained by a business. And this is for Xana Kernodle. And it says here that records show that Xana Kernodle was on TikTok application on November 13, 2022 at approximately 3:16 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Now, I've seen a lot of typos, and it's kind of something that's irritating the crap out of me because there's been more than a few, several. And this is one of them. Obviously, it wasn't 3:16. That wasn't the time in consideration. That would have been before even Bryan Kohberger passed by the first time. So who cares about that? So it was 4:16, which makes a little bit more sense, right? Because at 4:16 or at 4:17, we know that there's audio where you can start to hear the altercation in Xana's room at 4:17. You know, if it was at 4:12 which that was one of my concerns. I was like, all right, I felt like Murphy went down into the room and interrupted Xana on her TikTok, and she took him back up. And I was like, man, from 412 and then 417, there's a lot of time there. I mean, she would have had to have gotten dressed or something. And then we find out that the only thing she was wearing was a sweater and underwear. And so that's probably not the case. Now this makes a little bit more sense. She was on TikTok until actually 417 or 416. And so I think this is when Murphy comes down the stairs and and she interrupts her and she turns it off. And then she proceeds to go upstairs and comes back, a minute or so. Makes a lot more sense for that distance of travel. So he's on the phone until 416. Let me make this bigger. I'm sorry. You guys probably can't read that right here. It says approximately 316. All right. So let's go over here. It says here, when I arrived on the third floor to assess the scene, I noticed a medium-sized curly-haired tan dog on the bed inside the western third floor, later identified as Kaylee Goncalves' room. My initial concern was preserving the scene. As part of the process, I asked one of the officers to shut the door so the dog did not attempt to jump on the bed with any of the victims. So when officers arrived, the door was open. So, and this is the door where Murphy was at. He had no blood or anything on him, so he wasn't in any of the rooms when the murders were happening. This is from the order on defendant's motion for Frank's hearing. It says here that at approximately 4 a.m., she heard Miss Goncalves walk up the stairs, and this is Dylan, walk up the stairs with her dog before running back down the stairs saying someone is here. So in order for Murphy to go up the stairs with who she thought was Miss Goncalves, Murphy would have had to have come down the stairs on his own, obviously, right? Defendant points out that Ms. Goncalves was killed in the upstairs bedroom where she was found the next morning. Thus, it could not have been her DM heard running down the stairs at 4 a.m. A little bit further down, it says, a dog can be heard barking numerous times starting at 4:17 a.m. That dog heard on the security camera continued to bark for 30 minutes after the suspect left. Detective Payne conducted a test to determine that dog was likely outside while barking. Murphy was found without any blood on him, even though the bedroom doors were open where the decedents were found. So this tells us a couple of things, right? And then a little bit further down, it says the sliding glass door to the residence, the same door where DM reportedly saw the suspect, was left open. So every door that Bryan Kohberger touched was left open. So there's a little bit of an MO right here, right? There's a little bit of characteristics of who he is and what he's doing. Now, in my opinion, I believe he's doing this to limit the amount of times he has to touch something. This would limit the amount of times, the amount of DNA that he would be transferring onto those objects. So his MO is to leave everything open. So we know that Kaylee's bedroom door was open. Murphy was in there. We know Maddie's door was open. We know Xana's door was open. And we now know that the sliding glass back door is also left open. On this document here, this is Detective Lawrence Morey, and when he spoke with Dylan, Dylan said she woke up around 4 a.m. She could hear Kaylee and Murphy, the dog, dancing. Dylan said she knew it was Kaylee because she recognized her voice, and she could hear Murphy barking. Dylan said she heard Kaylee go up the stairs and then say there's someone here. All right, so she wakes up around 4 a.m. and she hears who she thinks is Dylan and Murphy. Not Dylan, Kaylee and Murphy barking and playing upstairs. And then she hears Murphy go up the stairs with Kaylee. So it sounds like, to me, I think, based on all the information that we have here now, I believe that Bryan Kohberger walked into the so one last thing. Bryan Kohberger, and I probably should have pulled up the Linda Lane footage, but Bryan Kohberger pulls into the back of that house. Remember when we started off with that, him pulling around there? It's at 4:07 and like 35 seconds when he passes by Linda Lane to go back and pull up there behind the King Road residence. So I suspect he was inside that house by about 4:09, 4:10 the latest. That's the absolute latest. That's giving him an ample amount of time to take, to dress into something else, right? And so he gets into the house. The house is not very big. From the back sliding glass door to the hallway that leads up to the third floor is probably about 15 to 20 feet, if that. And that's really being generous. And then it's a few steps up and then turn and then a few steps up. It's a very small house. It's 3 stories. So it goes up, but the rooms are tiny. The home is very compact. It's a very small home. So he was probably in Maddie's bedroom, probably roughly around 4:10. So Murphy would have had to have come down, right, to get into Xana's room at 4:16 for Xana to be the person to be taking Murphy up the stairs. So at what point does that happen? Now, Xana, as we mentioned, wasn't completely dressed or anything like that. She was wearing a sweatshirt and appeared to be underwear, based on the documents. And so, how long would it have taken her to walk upstairs and come back? Obviously, at 4:16, that's when she gets off TikTok. At 4:17, the disturbance is heard. So it only took her a minute from the time that whatever, I'm assuming it's Murphy, interrupts her on TikTok, and for her to take him up the stairs, interact. And in my opinion, I believe there's not necessarily confrontation, but I think they see each other. I think Bryan Kohberger sees Xana and Murphy. And the reason why I think that is because it sounds like she walks almost all the way up to the 3rd floor. And then she turns around and runs down the stairs and says, someone's here. Murphy's not following her. Murphy runs outside. So to me, that tells me they both got spooked. They saw somebody and Murphy ran outside instead of running with Xana. And so Xana takes off to her bedroom. Bryan Kohberger takes off that way. Now, why does this mean that Bryan Kohberger targeted Kaylee? In my opinion, it's because he opened her door. He didn't need to. If his sole target was just Maddie, and he goes in there and Maddie just unfortunately has somebody else in her bed, and he takes her life, even if he hears Murphy maybe prancing back and forth or pacing at the door nervously, similar to like he saw Dylan and he heard Dylan close the door per the documents gone through them. She shut the door. She shut it closed. She didn't silently close it. So she knows that he was aware. He knows that they were aware. The person behind that door could have easily have been a person. It could have been Kaylee, because the person in Maddie's bed could have been a number of people. That could have been one of the other roommates. That could have been a friend of Maddie's. Bryan Kohberger doesn't know those things. That could have been an outside friend visiting, a relative. It could have been a number of persons that was in that bed. So, but he opens Kaylee's door. Now, in my opinion, he opens it second. And the reason why I think he opens it second is because when Xana gets off the phone from the TikTok, that's at 4:16 p.m. a.m. I'm sorry. 4:16 a.m. is when she's getting off TikTok. My opinion, had Bryan Kohberger gone up and gone to Kaylee's door first, and let's just say he opened it and he left it open. For one, it kind of doesn't make sense, because when they found Murphy, they found him laying in Kaylee's bed. I would have assumed that's something that is normal for him, to sleep in the bed. And so if Bryan Kohberger opens that door, I know he's leaving doors open, but if he sees a dog there, he's probably closing the door. He's not going to leave the door open so that way he can go commit the murders over here, or a murder, because he doesn't know if Maddie has somebody, with her or not. But let's just say he goes in there. There's a good possibility a dog's going to come back and bite him in the rear end while he's committing the crime, And so, or the dog's going to leave and go alert somebody like he did with Xana, in my opinion. And then now there's a possibility of somebody coming up behind him. So to me, I think he goes into Maddie's bedroom first. Then he goes into Kaylee's. And to me, the difference between why he didn't run out the back once once Xana saw him, that interaction there on the staircase, is probably because he probably figured that she hadn't called 911 yet. But and somebody saw, and I mean, she could call 911 if he would have ran out the back sliding glass door. She calls 911 at that point. He's kind of caught. He's busted, right? And so that's the one thing that bothers me about with Kaylee's room, because he didn't know if somebody was in there until he opened the door. And if he passed by and he looked in, I mean, the only other thing is maybe perhaps he passed by and he looked in and Murphy wasn't in the bed. Murphy was on the floor or something and just kept going. And at some point, Murphy goes down the stairs. I just find it odd that point would be at 4:16, 6 minutes into, what Bryan Kohberger is doing in that bedroom. And at that point is when Murphy decides to bolt down the stairs. I think it would have been a much sooner interaction with Xana in her bedroom. I don't think she would have been on TikTok for that long. So I in my opinion, I believe that both Maddie and Kaylee were probably targeted from that house at the very minimum. Why he attacked Ethan, it sounds like Ethan was asleep in the bed. No idea. Probably just an opportunity. He's in the bedroom. He's probably adrenaline pumped. Just from the report, sounds like he took 50 plus stabbings to Xana. Maybe that's what it was, but sounds like it was a hit to the to an artery. And then based on the reports and the interviews that Kevin Fixler's done, he said that Dateline did get something right. They got the seating wrong, that there was no evidence of Bryan Kohberger sitting down in Xana's room, but that there was some deep cuts into Ethan's legs that could be described as carving. And so they did get some stuff right, some stuff they didn't. But just wanted to point that out. All right, let's continue this. So that's kind of where I wanted to go with this when it comes to who I thought the target was. And based on the information that we have here and based on the information that we're getting from the documents, tomorrow, there's some information about soil. There's some information about some information about some witnesses that may have seen Bryan Kohberger in Washington, down there in Clarkson and near Lewiston or something like that. I'm going to see if we can deduce where the knife is. I think we might have a good idea. I'm going to try to work on that. That's what tomorrow's show is going to be about. We're going to do some of the same thing that we just deduced to try to figure out, how the order and how things went down. We're going to do the same thing with that tomorrow. All righty. Investigators still don't know what Kohberger had in his hands. She also reported that the man in the home later identified as Kohberger saw her after killing the roommates, but left anyway. From what Dylan described, I have a hard time imagining the killer did not see Dylan, Thompson said. At that point, he had been in the house probably longer than he planned, and he had killed more people than he planned. I wouldn't be surprised, or it wouldn't surprise us that the killer was scared at that point and decided they had to leave, not knowing if law enforcement had already been called. And that's exactly what I thought. Dylan yelled out for Kaylee after, according to the documents, she yells out for Kaylee twice. Right. Now, we had gotten some information a while ago that it was like to be quiet or something to that nature. Right. But that she calls out to Kaylee twice. And on the second time, it was towards the end of everything. This is when she's already heard somebody whimpering and it's okay, I'm going to help you. And so I think he's probably fixated in that room on whatever it is that he's doing at that time. But he probably heard at this time because it didn't sound like he was actively in an altercation with somebody. Like he may have been upstairs, when Dylan yelled out the first time. And so I think he probably heard a vocalization of some kind, Dylan yell out something, but not really aware of what it was, and knew it was time to go, and he had to leave. And so I've been saying that, I think that's one of the things that's maybe have spared Dylan. There's a good possibility that everybody in that house may have been a target. He may have, that not knowing if somebody called law enforcement may have been, that reason why. K-bar knife at trial. Thompson initially said prosecution intended to call a witness at trial. Two members of Kohberger's immediate family members. Thompson and his team considered calling Kohberger's older sister, Amanda, and either his mother or father. So a lot of reports about Melissa being somebody who maybe tipped off the FBI. Doesn't sound like those are accurate. Sounds like those are highly inaccurate. And, I'm just going to correct the narrative. I don't hide from the truth. So don't sound like those are accurate. Don't sound like Melissa Kohberger had anything productive to say whatsoever. It sounds like if any of his family members did have concerns, it was his sister Amanda, who I think was the sister who was residing at the house at the time. So it sounds like, when Howard Bloom mentioned that during the Christmas break, one of Bryan Kohberger's sisters was a little bit more suspicious about Kohberger and some of the things that he was doing. I think that's probably the extent of what their testimony was going to be. He wore gloves. He was acting weird. He was washing his car. They were probably going to ask him some questions about the K-bar knife. They had a specific timeline, a specific 10-day period, March 20th to March 30th, from when Bryan Kohberger had purchased and received the K-bar knife. So they were probably going to ask these these folks here, did you guys pick it up? Was it yours? Did you guys have it in your possession? Did you guys, obviously if they didn't, then it was received by Bryan Kohberger. They found some other items that was delivered with the K-bar. I think one of them was some supplements, and law enforcement did a test, and this is in the documents. They did a test by purchasing the same items that the K-bar knife came in with, the sharpener and the sheath and supplements and some other things, and just to ensure that they all come in boxed together, and that ended up being the case. But it sounds like it was just going to be the sister, Amanda, and either his mother or father. And here's an image of Bryan Kohberger's family. Real quick before we go forward, I want to say thank you, J Mofo, saying thank you, Daniel, and mods. Thank you, guys. Yeah, we have the best mods in the business. Natalie comes in with $19.99. Daniel, I keep thinking Xana did not knowingly get off TikTok. I find it odd that she would close the TikTok app because of the noise. Perhaps the TikTok shut off when she was attacked. How would that theory play into the time? It's possible. I think that when Dylan says that she heard who she thought was Kaylee, which obviously was Xana, go up the stairs with Murphy. Murphy had to have come downstairs first. And so I think that's what interrupted her TikTok. She got off of TikTok so she could take Murphy up the stairs. Let's see. But thank you for your support. Stephanie comes in saying, I think it's DM's voice yelling to be quiet that's heard on the audio since the slider was open and her door is so close to the slider. That's a good possibility. I didn't think about that one, Stephanie. That's actually a really good pickup. That's quite a possibility. Where was KG's phone found? I don't know. I don't think anything was disturbed. It was probably, I don't know. I'd be speculating if I told you where it was at. I have zero idea where her phone was found. I don't think there's any documents that have said that, but I'll ask, I'll ask a question. I'll ask that, but I don't know. I'll see if I can get the answer to that though. S Dubs comes in with $4.99. I wish he had called 911 instead of there's someone in the house. One or two may have been spared. Hit the like button. Yeah, no, I know. I mean, I wish, obviously, I too wish that 911 would have been called sooner. There's not much anybody, from what I understand, it would not have been made a difference, as far as saving somebody's life. Now, I do think that they probably would have caught Bryan Kohberger red-handed. They would have had, the vehicle leaving at every speed. I'm hoping they would have called in a lot of different law enforcement agencies in the area from neighboring cities to be on the lookout and start creating some sort of perimeter, and eventually would have caught him coming back into Pullman, because I think there would have perimeter been set up out there, and at the very least, if not somewhere out in the middle of nowhere. Who knows how that all would have gone down though. Let's see. I'm glad they gave context to the picture of mom and sister. Yeah. When it comes to Bryan Kohberger's family, I know I've been kind of harsh on their flight logs, and I find them interesting. I've come to believe that they were manipulated, by Bryan Kohberger. I believe that Bryan Kohberger saw the bolo on December 7th, freaked out. He ended up getting in his paranoia, he got an altercation with Professor Snyder again on December 9th. And maybe perhaps he created that altercation to create a reason to call his dad, to have his dad fly across country so they can get the car out of Dodge. I think that was the entire purpose of that. There's some documents in there, and maybe tomorrow or the next day I'll pull them up, where Bryan Kohberger tells a friend of his that he was planning on flying back home for Christmas. He's like, yeah, I'm getting ready to fly back home to Christmas. I think that was the initial intent. Now, the friend that he told him that while he was already back in Pennsylvania. He had already left. But I think what he told him was the initial plan, because Michael Kohberger purchased his plane ticket on December 10th, flew out December 11th with the intentions of getting there that evening. And my guesstimation is they would have been gone the next day. But because of a storm, it pushed them out he had to go into Spokane at 9, arrived around 9:35 p.m. On the 12th. And by the early the 13th, they were gone. And they also had to go from Spokane back to Pullman. And the reason why he had to fly into Spokane was because weather was horrible in Pullman. And so he had to fly there. So obviously weather wasn't the greatest driving back into Pullman. So it probably took him some time. I mean, I think you're probably looking at close to midnight or so. I think there's another document that shows that he was, or that may have been on the dateline, that he responded around 11 p.m. To somebody about grades. Maybe that was in the book or one of these documentaries, but Bryan Kohberger responded to somebody on the 12th, close to 11 p.m. about grades. And so that's probably around the time that he ended up getting back to his Pullman, Washington apartment. But this is his sister and his mom. What we do know also is that Bryan Kohberger's vehicle was inside of their garage being cleaned thoroughly. I don't know. There's a good possibility they were just very manipulated to Bryan Kohberger's manipulation, a victim of it as well. Jordan says, do you think if he wouldn't have seen Xana, he'd left? There's a good possibility of that. I think that maybe I have no idea. I don't know. As we continue to review them as potential witnesses, we decided they simply weren't the best witnesses to show what was going on. The parents were understandably protective of their son, and the sister really didn't seem to have anything specific that she could contribute. So based off of that, it does sound like the sister was trying to help, right? The sister really didn't seem to have anything specific that she could contribute, but it sounds like she was trying to contribute something. This to me is who was offering something to law enforcement, who was maybe perhaps suspicious of Bryan Kohberger's behaviors. None of what they shared was substantively incriminating during those discussions with Thompson called casual conversation. To the extent you have a casual conversation when the police execute a search warrant in the middle of the night. The two ID type cards were two women who were former co-workers or acquaintances of Bryan Kohberger's from several years earlier. At least one of them was from when he worked as a part-time school security officer at the Pleasant Valley School District. So he was a part-time security officer, and apparently so was this other woman, and he stole her ID card, or at least had it. The other one they don't mention, and I wonder if it's an older ID card, maybe of somebody who was a juvenile at the time. Maybe it's somebody who was maybe the reason why Bryan Kohberger got kicked out of school. Remember, he got transferred out of the law enforcement class, went to the HVAC class, and then he had to finish online. So maybe that's what that was about. I don't know, though. Both of the individuals were contacted by investigators. They didn't know how Mr. Kohberger ended up with those items, and they had not been harmed or threatened or anything themselves. What investigators never recovered either in Pennsylvania or at the Kohberger's graduate student apartment was the knife sharpener. He bought it on Amazon on March 2022 when he bought the K-bar knife and sheath. They never found the knife used in the murders. So the sharpener also was not found. At trial, however, prosecutors intended to present a K-bar knife and sheath to the jury for demonstrative purposes, replicated what the Amazon purchase showed that Mr. Kohberger had done. Thompson had received criticism mainly from the Goncalves family, but also from the Kernodle's father for striking a deal with the defense that bypassed a trial and possible death sentence for the man who murdered their daughters. Thompson said he doesn't hold strong personal feelings about the death penalty, but recognizes that it is the will of the people and in the state through the Idaho legislator, and does accept it at face value. The prosecution absolutely would have tried to get a case if the case had gone to trial, he said. It certainly was a case where the death penalty was appropriate. If we ended up going through trial into a penalty phase, I think under the law, it met the elements. In the end, Thompson says, I think we did our job. We had the opportunity to do it in a way to really give some immediate finality, which wouldn't have happened if we had gone through the trial. We're pleased and relieved with the community, and the victims' families aren't going to have to continue through this and relive this during a trial. So interesting stuff. A lot of new things to digest and talk about when it comes to this interview that they had with Bill Thompson. Very good article. I didn't read everything that was in it, but I kind of got all the stuff that we had a question or concern. Now, he had other interviews, and I kind of want to go through some of the things he was saying in those other interviews. One of them that he had on the Idaho Statesman was with other reporters, and they were kind of talking about, and this is Kevin Fixler, they were talking about the history with the investigation. And so I wanted to kind of touch on some of the things that they talked in that there. They're talking about initially, very early on, they found out that police canvassing around town, and they went to the hardware store, the Moscow Building Supply, and law enforcement asked him multiple times if somebody had bought a K-bar knife there. So when it came to, like, for instance, early on reports of the fixed blade knife and the K-bar, and essentially what would turned into Papa Roger's theory, this is probably a big indication of where that started at. Let's see. They said they talked to a neighbor. One said that Bryan Kohberger parked in the same parking spot at odd hours and came in late. Now, we did a video last night, and I highly recommend going and watching it. We broke down Bryan Kohberger's traffic stop. One of the biggest things that I pointed out right away was that we could see that in the initial part of the traffic stop that his headlights and his taillights are on. But when the officer approaches and the window goes down, all the interior lights are off. The dash lights, every light is off. It's pitch black in that vehicle. He had just came from being parked outside of the King Road residence, or within 100 meters of it at least, and been parked out there for at least an hour for the hour leading up to the traffic stop. So to me, kind of, this was in August. It's kind of hot. It's summertime. It's the dog days of summer still in August. You park back there. You probably, if you're surveilling, you're casing out the place. You might have your vehicle on. Now, if you have your vehicle on so that you can have the AC going, you don't want the light in the interior lighting your face up like a Christmas tree so that somebody inside the house can look outside and see this light on. No, he dimmed it down. But we talked about what else he had done. I recommend going and watching it because I pointed out quite a few things out of that traffic stop. But we also talked about what else he was doing that night. We broke down from the documents the hit and run that was outside of Bryan Kohberger's apartment complex. And during those documents, we discovered that between, I want to say like 11 and almost 3:25, part of where Bryan Kohberger would park most of the time or always park at was visible on dash cam or body cam from the officers that were there. And Bryan Kohberger's car was not there. And we also find out around 10:30, he's at the Walmart purchasing some item at 10:30 p.m. that night. So he was doing something for a few hours leading up to the murders. What it was, don't know, but it sounds like, based on the documents that we read, that all of his activity was happening in Pullman. He wasn't in Moscow. He wasn't at the corner club, wasn't at the grub truck, wasn't at the Sigma Chi. Those things don't pop up on his phone history. Now, the other thing, and I'm going to see if I can, because I thought I sent it to me, but I thought I did. Let me see if I have it here real quick. But one of the things that they were talking about was, yep, I do. Pull it up over here. So one of the other things that they talked about is Fixler was asked about Bryan Kohberger downloading Broadcastify to listen to the 911 services in the area. Now, I had looked this up a while ago, but they mentioned that they were laughing because Bryan Kohberger was looking at Pullman and Pullman Police and Fire, and that he should have been looking up Moscow. He was looking up the right spot. Whitcomb 911 dispatches. This is from Moscow City Police. The city continues to contract all dispatching E911 responsibilities to Whitcomb Communications Center in Pullman, Washington. So it was the same one. And what he was looking up and what he was listening to shortly after the murders was to see, and this is why, this goes back to Dylan again. Dylan sees him. And I think this is what also made that mistake. Dylan sees him. He sees Dylan. He hears Dylan. He's aware that his presence is known in the house by somebody who's alert, somebody who could call 911. So he leaves and he gets out of there. But he's got to hear what's going on now. If that didn't happen, let's just say Dylan didn't yell out, Dylan stayed quiet, and Bryan Kohberger had no idea that Dylan was there. I would suspect he probably would have stayed in that house a little bit longer, had that been the case. But let's just say he decides to leave, has no idea that Dylan is there. I have a strong suspicion that he's not turning on that phone until he gets back to Pullman. Well, because Dylan saw him, curiosity kills the cat. So he turns on that phone to listen to the dispatch there to see what's going on. And he's probably tripping out because nothing's happening. And I think that's what gives him the confidence to go back at 9 o'clock in the morning, because that scene could have been discovered at any time. And this is a criminology student. He understands and knows when a scene like this is discovered, a perimeter is going to be made. They're going to try to document every vehicle and their license plates that go in and out of that place, because it is common knowledge that when crimes like this occur, that most often than not, the killer will return to the crime scene. And Bryan Kohberger would have known that. So something gave him the comfortability to drive back out there, knowing that the scene wasn't found. Now, I know some people might say, well, the news didn't report it until later. Yeah, but when the news reports something is often several minutes, half an hour, if not longer, after the scene has been discovered. The scene has to be discovered first before the news can pick up on it, so to speak. So he had enough comfortability to go back out there, and that was why. Let's see. Okay. All right. Let's go back to this document here. They go on to say that, that Bryan Kohberger's neighbor also talked about that he himself had done an ancestry. He himself did an ancestry, which might make sense, because from the time that the FBI took over to the time that they ID'd Bryan Kohberger's name, it was just a couple of days. And so I often thought that connection must have been real close. But these reporters spoke to a neighbor of Bryan Kohberger's, and that's what he had said. They asked Bill Thompson, which it didn't come out in this document here that we just read, but they had asked Bill Thompson about what book was page 118 from. He had no idea. That was part of, that's what Pennsylvania put in there. They highlighted that there was several textbooks and several other books that were associated with his studies that were picked up. They did talk about the two women ID cards, which we already went over. They mentioned that they tried to see if they could get an interview with Ann Taylor. It doesn't appear that Ann Taylor's office is going to be talking anytime soon. They mentioned that they had gotten some information from law enforcement throughout this investigation, and that law enforcement wasn't very honest all the time. They gave information, like for instance, they discussed that law enforcement kind of told them the location of where the bodies were, and that it was wrong. Mentioned that Papa Roger was not Bryan Kohberger. And that was basically the only things that were brought out that we didn't discuss already that was in that interview. And then there was a courtroom confidential. There was a courtroom confidential interview that Kevin did. And these are some of the things that were brought out there. And I'll go through it. It says here that BK wanted the plea deal, and which we already had known about that as well. They did mention in this courtroom confidential that there was more evidence to come. It wouldn't be like substantial evidence, but there is some more strong evidence. Majority of what we know is pretty much, sounds like the gist of everything. This is the part where they mentioned the container, and that Bryan Kohberger was walking with a container holding it like this, and that there was like some sort of arrow pointing up, something of that nature. It says here, BK went to the third floor. Maddie or Kaylee are the target. No DNA from Xana on the third floor. And they believe likely Xana life was taken before Ethan's. They said that BK did not sit in the room, but that Dateline did get the carving right, and the cut to the back of Ethan's legs were deep into the tissue. They said that BK was successful with wiping out his phone. And I had heard that. I had heard that he had done several things, had several applications on his phone that were constantly deleting things. And Bill Thompson had basically stated that, that Bryan Kohberger was successful in clearing out his phone. This is where they asked why the house, and they mentioned that maybe it's because it's hiding in plain sight, crime of opportunity, may have chosen that house that night or just in those moments before he decided to go in. And as I mentioned, we kind of broke that down. I don't believe that to be the case, in my opinion. They asked about the vegan link to the Mad Greek, and they said that there was no verifiable purchase. Bryan Kohberger never used his debit card there, which doesn't mean he didn't take out cash at an ATM. And I think that's one of the things that Dateline mentioned. Now, Dateline mentioned that Bryan Kohberger stopped using his debit card after the 10th, and that's not entirely true. He used it one time after the 10th, around the time of the murders, right? And then I think he starts using it again on the 15th or the 16th. But there is a specific between the 10th and like the 15th. he uses his debit card one time, and that's at a Walmart. And it's just so happened to be a few hours before the murders at 10:34 p.m. on the 12th, just before midnight in Pullman, Washington. And so they reference that he was pulling out cash from ATMs. And so perhaps he did visit the Mad Greek, however, utilize cash instead of his credit card. And I think that's a possibility. He's kind of distinct looking. I would have, a lot of people, I think people would have recognized if they had seen him, in my opinion. But apparently nobody has. Even if it was like a false sighting, I would expect something like that. Like, somebody that kind of looked like him, that, I may have seen him, but it seems like they're pretty adamant that they've not seen him there. They did mention that there was 23 pings in the neighborhood, and that there was a running joke inside of the household where Kaylee had seen somebody in the woodline area, a shadowy figure, at one time. Let's see. Kaylee's door is open, and that was the other thing that they referenced in this interview, that Kaylee's door was open on the third floor. Both were in bed under the covers. So this is where they asked Brian, Bill Thompson, they said, hey, in the court documents, you write that there's appears to be what looked like somebody laying in the bed in Kaylee's room and then got up. And that was the only disturbance in the bed. Is it possible that Kaylee would have, heard, if Kaylee heard something going on, maybe she walked over there? And that would kind of make some sense. Maybe that she gets up to go check, right? And then that's what, it's at 4:16. And that's when she opens the door, and then that's when Murphy runs downstairs. Maybe. Or maybe a little bit earlier than that. Maybe. But one of the things that I had said, I was like, it seems like they were pretty adamant that that wasn't the case. One of the things that I am assuming, and I went through the court documents and saw, was that Kaylee and Maddie were both underneath the blankets. And so it appears that ended up being the situation. And Bill Thompson said no, that he believes that they were already in bed, laying, that there was blanket over them, blood and stuff like that. And my assumption is that there's probably tears through the blanket, so it's not like he covered them afterwards. There's probably tears through the blanket when he was committing the crime. And so Bill Thompson strongly believes that Kaylee was in the same bed with Maddie before Bryan Kohberger walked in there. They had just fallen asleep or were asleep already for some time when he walked in. They go on to say that BK did not pose any of the victims. They talk about how he monitored Pullman police and fire, took screenshots, and had screenshots of news articles pertaining to the case on his phone. And then talked a little bit about the interrogation and how Bryan Kohberger was just super calm during that interrogation. He made small talk, talked about liking baseball and things of that nature. And it was like the gravity of what was going on, the seriousness of what was going on just didn't hit him. He was really calm. And I mean, they just flash grenaded his house, broken, I don't know how many windows and doors. They zip tied his parents onto the ground. And the only thing he says is like, "Are my parents, my dog okay? Yeah, all right, cool. Let's engage in small talk. You want to get coffee later?" It's weird. It's weird. And a little bit of a cat and mouse is the way they also described it. Like, you tell me why I'm here. Well, why do you think we're here? No, you tell me. Like, so that's kind of what they described. And so didn't get much out of it outside of that. He's just a very odd person. All right, I'll answer a few of your questions, guys, if you don't mind. If you have some questions, put a couple of stars. I'll be here for the next 10 minutes or so, and I'll answer your questions. Let's see. Lynette comes in with $4.99. So he was probably listening to the scanner, those earbuds, and the selfie. You know what? You're probably right. I didn't think about that. You're probably right. he's probably trying to figure out what in the world's going on. They still haven't found it. And he would have just came back, from being out there in Moscow. But yeah, there's a good possibility that may have been what he was listening to. Let's see. I'm going to scroll up just a little bit, put a couple of stars if you have some comments or questions for me. I apologize if I didn't see the ones earlier. There's 1,521 people in here. Please hit the like and subscribe, guys. I'm so close. We're so close to 50,000 subscribers. I think 200 and some away. If there's 200 of you guys in here who aren't subbed, I'd appreciate it. Ooh La La comes in saying, in my opinion, Ann Taylor isn't going to talk because she has more up her sleeve, allegedly. No, I don't think so. I think it had to do with some sort of law or something within their, like unless Bryan Kohberger gives them the okay, they can't talk about it. It wasn't anything like that. It was more out of an inability to do so. Ann Taylor can't talk about any details of the case. There you go. Exactly what Chloe said. Let's see. But yeah, that was exactly why. He didn't choose that house that night. No way. No, I don't believe he chose that house that night. He chose that house some other time. I can't say it was the first time that he was out there that, okay, this was it. It may not even have been, I would assume by August, he probably had some sort of inkling. You remember, he purchased this K-bar knife before he went out there. He bought this K-bar knife in March of 2022. This was at the height of his life. This was, he was getting a master's degree. He was getting to travel across the country. He got accepted in the PhD program. Only one of two people ever recommended from the professor that he had, who he was assigned to help him get that position. I mean, and yet he's purchasing the knife. According to the court documents, too, he throws out that Reddit survey, right? Close to about April. And a lot of people are like, man, that's weird that he's putting out this Reddit survey in April. You know what's even weirder? Is that Reddit survey turned him down. The Reddit turned him down. They said no. They actually banned him. And he had to submit some questions. And this is in the documents, too. These are in the documents. I'll see if I can find them real quick. But he had to write to Reddit and basically Reddit and tell Reddit, like, hey, I'm doing a research paper for DeSales University, blah, 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 blah. But all this was in June. This was in June. He had already graduated. And yet he was still trying. The survey didn't get pushed through, yet he was still trying to do the survey. Just an interesting thing, you know what I'm saying? Like, way later. I hope I saved it. I know I did. I just can't. I don't remember where. Let's see. Tip. Okay. But yeah, I'll have to find it again. But yeah, this was all in the beginning of July or June when he's talking with Reddit, and Reddit says, all right, we're going to go ahead and allow this and move forward. So 100% he had like this idea of committing the crime. I would have to say that if, my here it is. I found it. My thing is, I believe that he had it in mind that he wanted to feel what it felt like to take somebody's life. So here it is. It says here, this talks about two accounts. The second account was registered in April of 2022. And it says the registration IP, which showed a location near Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. And then it goes again that it was again active on November 21st, 2022. So about a week afterwards, which showed a location near Kansas City, Missouri with level 3 communications. This IP address also showed a high probability of being in a VPN exit point. The email address showed it was verified. So a week after the murders, he was back in his Reddit account, maybe perhaps comparing and contrasting to his own Reddit survey and to other people that may have answered it. It's interesting. November 21st. He was back on Reddit. In reviewing the files, I located a file of content, blah, blah, blah. Hello. This is, look at the time, June 3rd. Let me zoom in. June 3rd, 2022 at 9:45 UTC. So this is at Universal Time. Hello, I attempted to post a survey in the prison subreddit, but my post is automatically removed. I imagine this was due to the lack of activity on my account. As I've seen others post research recruitment posts on the subreddit within the past few months, would it be possible to obtain approval to submit recruitment post to prison? The recruitment post has my information in it, and the survey itself is an informed consent that confirms my affiliation. I'd be able to post my survey to other Reddit subreddit groups such as ex-cons and ex-felons. You can look up the specifications of my recruitment posts by looking at these posts. Thanks in advance, Brian. A little bit later, he gets a response saying, I just approved your most recent post. The next day, Bryan Kohberger responds, thank you. We want to remind you. Hold on, let me see. I don't remember what that one is. This is a bot that's telling him something about his thread, and then they might be removed. And then this one says from, and it's blocked, and I'm assuming this is Brian's. And this is on the 8th. Would it be possible to have a repost of my recruitment post approved for submission? So he's still trying to get this going a while after he was already graduated from DeSales. It says you have been temporarily banned from participating in Reddit felons. You have been temporarily banned from participating. This ban will last for 1 day. You can still review. Then on the 11th, it says, thank you for submitting a report to Reddit. Your report and relevant content have already been processed through our anti-abuse systems for review. It is determined that the report content does not violate. So he was doing this until the 11th. And this is what the post was. Hello, my name is Brian. I am inviting you to participate in a research project that seeks to understand how emotions and psychological traits influence decision-making, etc. So, yeah. All righty, guys. Let's see. Scroll through this pretty quickly. Who was the tipster who gave the date range on the Amazon purchase? I'm going to assume that was one of his family members, and that was probably one of the things that they were going to ask him and testify to. But that's my assumption. I mean, it could have been from his payment methods and stuff like that. How could Ethan not awaken? He was highly intoxicated, more than likely. You know, when I was in law enforcement, there was this a few times, more than a handful, more than like 15, 20 times, where I came across somebody who was blacked out, drunk, knocked out. And I was like, one scenario that I'll refer, this guy pulled up to the gas station and he parked parallel to the door against the lines. He didn't park straight where the lines were. He parked against them, like sideways, jerk, and fell asleep. Didn't even get out of the car. He's just parked in front of the gas station. So the gas station clerk called law enforcement, would show up, and the guy has his foot on the brake, but the car is in gear. And I was literally beating on the dang window, on the door, pushing, hitting the car. And the guy was so drunk, he just didn't wake up. You know, it was a pretty crazy parties that were going on that night. I wouldn't be surprised that they were highly intoxicated. It's unfortunate, but I think that's the reason why he didn't wake up. Let's see. Hey, Dr. Vona, how's it going? Hope everything's going well on your end. I called that too about the survey. I knew it. I am a research, but I called. Yeah, I know. And then I want to take the time to ask you how you're feeling. I know you've been on this case since the start. Many blessings to you, Steve, and the community here. Thank you, Paula. I'm feeling good. You know, I'm kind of glad that this thing's over with now. You know, I'm glad that this guy admitted guilt. You know, I know there's a lot of people that are out there that still are in this fantasy that he's innocent and somehow think that there's some sort of weird trickery going on, and he's going to appeal, and he's going to be like, gotcha. I don't know. But overall, I think that the evidence was clear. I have concerns about the presentation or how it was going to be presented based on some of the things that were said in court by Bill Thompson. And so because of that, I'm more pleased with the plea deal because of that. I do know that this saved the families a lot of pain seeing those things. And I know that not all the families wanted this plea deal, and perhaps they wanted some information, and I think some people are misinterpreting that the information that they wanted was going to be public. I think they wanted it for themselves so that they can heal and have closure. And I think that if they had those things, plus a few other things that would have been public, that would have put all doubt aside, like for instance, the location of the K-bar knife, which we're going to talk about tomorrow, guys. I'm going to deduce the area and these court documents, kind of similar to like what we did today, and see if we can kind of come up with an area of where the knife could have been, at least at one point. I don't even know if it's still there at this point. Bryan Kohberger was on the run and in that area for about a month before he fled that area to Pennsylvania. I think it was December 12th, 13th. So a month to the date of the murders that he got out of that area. So he could have easily gone back a few times and moved things around more than one time. So, but we're going to try to deduce to see where it was, at least early on, and see if we can figure something out. Yeah, no, I'm good. Thank you for asking. I know I'm also going to be working on another case with Steve from True Crime Web. He's working on a cold case that I think we may have solved. And so we're going to break out some information on that. So make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe, especially if you're into that type of stuff, because I have some interviews planned about this case, and it should be exciting. I got a lot of exciting stuff when it comes to that case. Let's see. How cruel is it that he said he was going to help her in a not nice manner? Yeah, I agree. It was 100% for his own pleasure. The questions were not IRB acceptable. At least they would not be at the school in PA or New Jersey. Yeah. I got to get you back on, Dr. Vona. I know you're going through some things, so hopefully we can do that soon. Chloe comes in saying, Dan, they got the Devil's Den, dude. Nice. I saw that they were, they had a vehicle, Mazda, pulled over. I'm glad that they were able to find that guy. For those that aren't aware, there was a guy who took the lives of a couple out in Arkansas, and he's been on the run for a couple of days, and it looked like they found the guy. That's good news. That's good news. I was going to start covering that case and looking into it, talking about the motives and crime of opportunity, those type of things. And I guess we'll find out soon enough what they have, but that's good. Thank you so much, Chloe, for bringing that up. Presser in 5 according to Fantastic Mod. Nice. Maybe we'll go listen to that. But all right, guys, I think that's going to do it. Let me make sure I don't have anything else. Yeah. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I want to thank everybody for being a part of the show. You guys are great. Thank you to our wonderful mods, members, our subscribers, for everybody that's new, that's joined. I'm going to put a link into the Discord so that you guys can tune in and be part of the conversation. It's only for members, so you do need to join. But we have a great community on Discord where we share information, talk often about many of the things that I'm going to be talking about on the show. We go over a lot of the information there first. So if you want to have access to it, make sure you hit that join button. But I'll be back tomorrow night, guys. Until then, y'all be safe. We'll see you then. Peace out. Later.